Hi, everybody, and welcome to Take Flight, the show that helps new designers get their dreams off the runway and into the sky. I'm your flight attendant, Cat, and I am delighted to introduce you to our crew for this flight. First of all, in the rear of the aircraft, we have Keegan running tech. Hi, Keegan. Thank you. And today's pilot, we have streamer and TTRPG writer Jeffrey Davis. Jeffrey, say hi.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is a thrill to have you. And in the co-pilot seat, here to help Jeffrey out, we have Adam Vass of World Champ.
Hello, everyone.
Sorry. Okay, everyone. Before we get started, a brief safety demonstration. In case of an emotional emergency, please familiarize yourself with the exits to the stream and assist yourself before helping others. On today's flight, we may be passing through areas of young combatants, violence, allusion to child abuse, unreality or surreal horror, and references to drug use or sleep paralysis. We value your comfort and safety here at Take Flight Airlines, so if these conditions would be unsafe for you, please feel free to join us for another flight. And now that we have got that out of the way, hello again, you two.
Hello.
So, Jeffrey, I would love for you to tell us briefly about what you're working on. Give us the pitch.
I'll give you the pitch. All right. So, it's just you and your friends against time itself. In this game of ours, players develop a haunted town collaboratively for the story to take place in. Then they form a clique of middle school to high school aged friends that face down the cosmic evils that reside there. The force motivating these evils is a group of otherworldly beings known as the Hours. The Hours govern over time and reality. And for the purpose of a dreadful and mysterious experiment, they continue to play with the lives of everyone in the universe. If the players survive childhood without turning into monsters themselves, the fight continues with new roles to play in adulthood. Should they survive this second encounter, the final place they face the Hours is in a dark, surrealist horror future where the Hours assert final control over reality and bend it to their incomprehensible whims. Players will have to use wit, strength, any supernatural abilities they may possess, and resist the temptations of regret to overcome these threats. Can friendship and mutual purpose withstand such powerful enemies? Only time will tell. And there's my pitch.
That was so powerful, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
Jeffrey, that was so powerful. I think, wow, you should read audiobooks or something.
I used to do that.
I know. That was gorgeous. Jeffrey, this is Keegan has posted a link to this game of ours on Itch in chat. So if you want to take a look at the pre-release of what we have, I'm loving this visual design that I'm seeing. It's very, very collagey, very cobbled together. And I just adore that.
Thank you. Dada was very much a loud artistic influence in putting together everything, especially because I can't draw very well.
I mean,
yeah.
What you gotta do.
Yeah, exactly. And so I opted for a visual approach that not only reflects like the kind of art that I like, but also tries to get across the ideas of time shuffled around, time sort of not fitting into join. We actually got a whole bunch of abandoned photos from warehouses, from family sales, from estate sales, and things like that. And I made sure to anonymize them, but also just sort of futzed with them digitally and gave them a kind of glitchy look. And of course, in the introduction of the book, just in case, everyone's like, wait a minute, that's my uncle. I'm like, please contact me. I will gladly send you pictures of your uncle. Please take them.
If this is your uncle, please. Yeah. So now comes the part where we talk briefly about what Adam is best known for. Adam, for those in the chat who are not familiar with your work, please.
Yes, I make and publish role-playing games as World Champ Game Co. My most popular releases are the stoner metal science fantasy Necronautilus. I made the scumbag low-tech demon-infested cyberpunk game Cyber Metal 2012. I make almost monthly zines over on my Patreon, so there are a wealth of titles there that people might have picked up, like After the Party, or Lucid was a popular one that's similar in tone to what Jeffrey's talking about with this project, in terms of dream hopping and surreality. And I was nominated for Babes in the Wood, my Over the Garden Wall inspired children in a
Oh my goodness.
Halloween and
Wait, Babes in
forest.
the World was you?
Yes.
Listen, our first guest was somebody who's award-winning for running a Babes in the Wood AP.
Oh, that's awesome.
Dang. Kendall, are you watching? Kendall, are you watching? Look who I got. And I'm like, sorry. So this is a big part of why I matched the two of you up, is because you've both got a taste for the weird. You've both got a taste for the surreal and for things that are expressing something kind of beyond literal intention. The other reason is that Adam is, by and large in the industry, really well known for being able to take concept to product. Like, your manuals are gorgeous. I'm sure I'm not the first person to have told you that. And like, World Champ reliably gets like physical copies of a game, despite it being, and we talked about this before, largely a one-man show.
Correct.
So I was like, if anybody can help Jeffrey make this real, even though it is surreal, it is Adam.
I hope so. That's my goal here.
So now comes the time where Adam and I are going to be asking you a bunch of questions about this game of ours. Chat, feel free to chime in. If you've got any questions for Jeffrey about what this project needs to look like, let us know and we'll pass them on. The goal here is to get an idea for where Jeffrey is and what is kind of hitching things up. Adam, do you have any questions to start with?
Just as point of order, because I'm scribbling on a bunch of sticky notes that I'll sort of rearrange on my desk as we go. What's the name of this project?
This game of ours. So HOURS.
Cool.
Yeah. I can't resist a pun.
Yeah.
If you have a question queued up, that would be great. That might buy me enough time to look up this one thing that I want to know real quick.
Absolutely. So I can see it on the itch page, but for the sake of the viewers, what is kind of the skeleton of this game mechanically?
Great. So mechanically, this started out as a Forged in the Dark hack. So this is drawing from Blades in the Dark using that kind of system. In case you're unfamiliar with Blades in the Dark, it's an Apocalypse World variant. In case you're not familiar with Apocalypse World, don't worry.
Oh.
So it is basically, rather than having your straightforward kind of initiative-led combat encounters where experience is centered around combat, such as in D&D, this is much more akin to, say, an episode of Leverage, the TV show, wherein the party is not just a collection of individuals, but also a character in and of itself. And you have basically short burst missions, and these short burst missions end up sort of facilitating play, getting to the good stuff rather than getting bogged down in, well, hold on, I got to Bruce Wayne the plan. I got to make sure that, you know, the Tomb of Horrors doesn't immediately kill us. Rather, it's like, no, let's just go ahead and fast forward. You do this thing, and here's how you do it. Now let's go ahead and play and show off the competencies of the characters and the party. The other element that I'm bringing in for the Haunted Town generation is based off of Everest Pipkin's The Ground Itself, which I was extremely impressed by. And Everest Pipkin's The Ground Itself has to do with generating a literal landscape. through a kind of mechanical process of procedural generation. And I use and I basically adapted Everest Pipkin's work into generating specifically a haunted town. This isn't just so, it's an option, but it's also to create player investment in the place that they get to build together, and then spooks happen to them therein.
I'm so big on that lately. My latest project is also really big on just like leveraging player investment, and also taking a little bit of the weight off the GM, because I think the classic GM model has the GM responsible for 100% of the world building, in addition to adjudication during play and story building. And if you do a collaborative setting with your players, that's one less thing that poor overworked friend of yours has to do.
Exactly.
So I'm also all about that lately. I love it.
The other mechanics. The primary play is very much forged in the dark. The play is sort of divided up into 3 different eras with different playbooks for each era. So you have the first one, which is already released, which is childhood. This is, usually middle school, high school aged characters facing down Griblies in the dark. And each playbook allows them a kind of a different way to slot into the plan of attack. When they become adults, they get a whole new set of playbooks that are basically elaborations of the childhood playbooks, sort of becoming more specified. And that's something I'm still working on. And then we have the sort of fantastic surreal future, which the best way I can describe it is Terminator meets Sailor Moon.
Oh, yeah.
So it's absurd. It's absurd, but it's basically a kind of a magical witch coven kind of deal, and the playbooks change yet again according to their role within that particular coven. So it's a lot. It's a very ambitious project.
Yes, it absolutely is. And that's, I mean, you're the one who bid it. I don't have to chew it. I don't get to tell you how much you can fit in your mouth. Like,
I
don't get to tell you.
I'm trying to dislodge my jaw. It's a thing.
If there's anything how can I put this? I do not want this as a show to be the kind of show that dissuades people from taking big swings. Like, hey, audience, you get to decide what fits in your mouth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether or not something's too ambitious, that's for you to decide, and literally no one else.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah.
Adam, you got questions?
Yeah. So a question, or a set of questions rather, that I ask myself in my process all the time, and we talk a lot about on the Brain Trust podcast. It's kind of some older design tech from The Forge, which is our may or may not be a dirty word to
the F word on my show.
Current indie
I do know the word.
F word on my show.
We talk about the 3 questions, and there are different iterations of the 3 questions. But the one that I typically focus on the most, which is going to emphasize my themes of design, are what do players do, what do characters do, and what is your game about? You've talked a lot about what the players do mechanically, although I still have some follow-ups that I want to get into there. But I'd like to focus more on the latter 2 for theme emphasis, mostly because that's sort of, again, where I think I'm going to excel in being able to guide you in any kind of way, is to make sure that this is not just a flavorful skin over a functional skeleton. Like, we want everything to work together. We want all these pieces to lock together, and that's like what makes a game good, and that's what accomplishes those themes. So we talked about this off air a little bit, but I want you to sort of give maybe if a 1 or 2 sentence, if that's even possible, answered what is your game about, thematically, metaphorically, not necessarily like the narrative experience, but what are the like messages and themes that you're trying to get across in this game?
Okay. Give me one moment. Formulating. The game is about both the relationship to regret that we have in a socially embedded situation, as well as the colonial domination of timekeeping that orders our experience.
I can already, from what you've explained mechanically with the eras shifting, the regret there is pretty clear how that will kind of like integrate into that aging of your character and that passage of in fiction time. Can you elaborate on the colonialism aspect? And in that same breath, do you have you crafted any specific mechanics that will reflect those themes to make sure that players are engaging with them, not just in a abstract way, but in a way that forces them to consider that? And like the answer can be no. But
the answer, I think, is I am currently building it, and I'm going to see if I hit the mark, and if I don't, then I'm going to revise it.
Sure.
So, as far as the coloniality of time, there is a very deliberate style choice in not only the presentation of the hours, but also in how the supernatural abilities are cashed out. I have 12 years in philosophy. I just came out of a PhD program from philosophy and social epistemology and political philosophy of language. And part of that is noticing the ways that colonial reasoning, specifically the sort of West, uses sort of formal logic structures and formal speech act theories in order to erase or at least elide other forms of relation. Now, most of the antagonist forces, they're named they're named after a lot of different kind of formal logical mechanisms. So there's your sort of first clue going, okay, it will seem strange to a layperson. Most people won't know what an exercitive is, and that's perfectly fine. That is not actually necessary. The second sort of more obvious hint is that each hour corresponds to an hour of the clock, and the thing that they are looking for, the reason for the experiment, is literally these sort of children beings that are the reason that are life itself. They are both the cinder, the kind of spark of life, the activity, the going forward, and the trace, the remnant of the cinder, dust. And they are trying to dominate through a lot of their sort of relentless logics. One thing I'm trying to split the hair of, because I know of other systems that have tried to integrate these sorts of anti-oppression messages in them, and they've really, really bungled it. One thing I've been trying to figure out is ways that the sort of colonial character of the hours, A, doesn't come off as extractivist, and B, hits mechanically in a certain way. One mechanism, at least mechanically, that I have is through their primary instrument, which is a fictionalized tarot deck. That the way it works mechanically, I actually drafted up some rules here, and hopefully I can get this all out. Is the deck can only be used after about 5 game sessions pass. But when the players desire, if players want to take that risk, what they can do is activate the deck, which is sort of transforming the flashback mechanic in Forged in the Dark. At the end of every session, the players pick one moment that they believe was important to the success of the mission. Each moment is called a locus point. They're collated into a numbered list. So, first session, number 1, and if there's 3 locus points, then it's 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. When the deck is utilized, the player states what they wish to be changed. This has to be on the level of like a fundamental order thing. They then roll their lowest attribute for resistance, because it's a very hard to control thing. Depending on what they roll, someone rolls what's called a deciding roll. They roll an appropriately faced die. So if there have been 9 sessions, they roll a d10, re-roll on 10. They do the same thing for the locus points. And whatever the die chooses, that locus point is now removed from the story. Their regrets over, wait, I haven't done this thing. I need this thing to change. I don't know what I'm doing, but I have to change it, has a cost, a direct cost to the table of taking away and extracting a particular success. So what happens after that? The storyteller then asks each player what they would think if the moment didn't occur. Each provides a brief 2 to 3 sentence answer. The storyteller then silently decides on the answer or answers that best fit, and the game continues. So that's sort of the beginning of it. I'm trying to figure out how to best highlight this sort of colonial domination thing angle with the hours, because that is, to me, that's a very obvious metaphor, but I got to figure out how to make it obvious for everybody else. So did that actually answer your question?
It did in ways, and it also provided me with new ones. But
Great.
that's sort of
That's
what conversation is, right?
Same here.
A big I'm trying to figure out how to put this note into question form and not have it be a statement, because I want you to sort of bounce off of it instead of make it sound like I'm saying something factually. But sorry.
If you need me to buy time, I've got one.
Oh no, I'm ready. I'm sort of just
Okay, no, go ahead.
thinking
Go
out
ahead,
loud.
then.
I'm making
Please.
me a lot of this one. You mentioned the some of the terms that you're using to emphasize these themes being kind of expected to be unknown to a player. With what you just described too, I think there's a greater onboarding issue to not just the sort of lexicon being used, but the lore that you're building that is going to require quite a lot from a player to know going in. Have you given thought and work towards what that process might be to get someone from maybe zero knowledge or base RPG knowledge into the world that you're crafting?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And that's actually a struggle point. Because it's the large onboarding process is something that is significant. And what I would want to do, like, it's a paltry plan, it's not a very good one, is increase the amount of lore in the book to sort of introduce them into the world and that kind of thing, sort of wrap it up in a narrative so that way it's a little bit more familiar. But then we kind of run into the Shadowrun problem, right? Where, there's 1.5 million jargon pieces in Shadowrun, and so, if you're new to RPGs and someone just throws Shadowrun at you, you're like, what is happening? So, and that actually pertains to a question that I've already brought to the table. So that's kind of interesting,
Cool.
of how to build in that particular process, because that is a severe weakness that I'm trying to figure out how to address.
I've got something I would like to bring up. And that's because between the playbook shifting as the characters grow to adulthood and the notion that this deck is off the table until 5th game, you're designing game for the long haul. This is meant for long-term campaign play. Do you have any plans for supporting a shorter-term experience, or for making a game that doesn't make it to session 5 still meaningful and enjoyable?
So that was also literally another one of the questions I had.
It's so not easy.
Great anticipation there.
I've had to rewrite games.
Yeah.
Like, I've had to rewrite like half of my current game because I realized that I was putting the fun stuff on the table too late. Like, it happens.
Yeah. And it's that directly pertains to my question of is there a process to trim campaign centered play into a more self-contained one sheet or one shot style of brief play? And that's something that I've been grappling with a lot, because I'm loquacious. I never shut up. So, I would absolutely go on and on and on and on and on with this campaign stuff.
All of the times the three of us have been on mic has been me and Jeffrey prattling while Adam waits patiently in the background.
That is sort of my MO too. I hope that doesn't ring as like
No.
I'm not paying attention or anything. That I'm usually a quieter
no, not at all.
personality in that way.
Yeah.
Not at
But
all.
I'm
No,
thinking.
that was squarely a dunk on me and a drive-by dunk on Jeffrey. Not at all on you, I promise.
Exactly.
But okay, so we've identified at least one sticking point that we need to make sure this game is satisfying the day someone picks it up, not just 3 months into the campaign. Okay, that's one thing we could talk about. Adam, where are you at?
I have a sort of tack on to that. And again, I worry that the way that this is worded, but I think wording it in the simplest and most blunt way is going to yield the correct answer. But to you, what about playing this game is fun? And by that, I mean, obviously there are different types of fun. And this is a thing that also comes up in like game design philosophy quite a bit, is the collaboration aspect, the focus, is the struggle, overcoming a challenge, is that a fun part? In the same way that like a puzzle is fun because you're trying to beat it. And there are like short academic papers about this, and like the type, I think there's the 7 types of fun or whatever, that every game designer should read that, and apparently retained very little of it, but enough to know that that's a good question to ask.
Actually, do you have a link, Adam?
I will look for it while
actually, here, you continue. I'm gonna Google it in the background because I would love to put it in chat for our viewers.
Because it is a super helpful resource. It's one of those things that's just printed out and in one of these shelves that I won't be able to find it, right now, of course. But so point being, like, have you considered the aspects of fun? And I guess I'll wait to hear your answer to see if there's what I have in mind to follow up with.
Okay. So during the playtest, we playtested for about 10 sessions. And during the playtest, what the group found most fun, and I think it's necessary to know that most of the people weren't necessarily subject matter experts in the kind of thing that I was talking about, which, okay, great. The collaboration of the world building, the haunted town building, that got a lot of engagement, got a lot of investment. It was very fun. The particular horror bits, the group seemed to really enjoy the actual confrontation of the Gribbly, whatever it might be. They enjoyed the sort of dialogic way that they were able to resolve things, because it wasn't necessarily combat focused. It was more like finding like a ghost's fetter, or almost like a British mystery kind of way of solution, rather than like hack. It's more like, okay, you are trying to capitalize on this emotion, and we're not going to let you do that because this is actually therapeutic in this way, that kind of thing. And I noticed my players kept on taking it in these sort of therapeutic directions and having a lot of fun with it. And that was really interesting. I found that quite fun, especially, because it was really original to see how the players were telling the story. And personally, I was very, very interested in having a lot of fun in listening to the players tell the story and determine the circumstances, not just me.
So that's great information to have, and it's great that you're already thinking about that from playtest feedback and from the play experience. The note that I wrote down, which I will probably come back to when we sort of teeter the totter here, is that it sounds like the most fun part of play for your players is the creative aspect. And there are ways, once we get into later parts of this conversation, that you can emphasize that, and you can sort of like the idea, I think, for a successful project, and successful is obviously very subjective, but to me, is to double down on what makes it special, what makes it fun for the players, and what makes it, I guess, unique, which is kind of redundant with the special thing. What makes it special to you, I guess, and what makes it special to a buyer or player? Usually those are separate answers. And then what makes it fun is kind of like maybe the most important one, because at the end of the day, as much theorizing and theme we want to put into these, they are games that are designed to be played in some fun fashion. Kat, the article that you posted in the chat was what I was thinking of. So,
okay. I wasn't able to put it in chat, but Keegan put it in chat for me. So if
cool.
you're curious about this academic paper on the nature of fun and the different ways people can have fun from a game, it's in chat right now. It's from MDA. It's good reading. So please check it out.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
Let's see. My notes are getting messier, but that's a good thing because there's a lot of stuff to grab on.
Yeah. That's when the sauce happens, is when the notes are illegible. Yeah.
So I guess we'll go back to the 3 questions question, right? We talked about mechanically how this is all working. We talked about what the game is about in this sort of metaphorical sense. The last one being, what do characters do? So like within the fiction, and I might just try to sum this up as someone who's getting the pitch rather than have you give it again. The players are trying to best these ethereal creatures that kind of exist, whether they maybe exist outside of time or they are time themselves. That's a thing that will require some explanation in the book itself, but in that sort of cosmic horror sense that you're not going toe to toe with a blunt weapon or whatever. You're having to contest them in other ways, especially when the first phase of play is kids. So what do characters do, I guess, is survive within this haunted time and place, and what survival looks like, and I guess similarly, like how they thrive, because you don't. I mean, it might just be a game of survival, which would be more adjacent to some of those horror themes. But whether these characters can actually like transcend their combat with, or not combat, but you know what I'm saying, conflict with this other group of beings.
Okay.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I think I'm seeing the contour of what you're saying. I think so. The verbs that I would probably aim for here are first investigate. The characters investigate the town, and the part of the haunted. And I think I needed to be a little bit more clear earlier on this. Part of the haunted town generation, at least in playtesting, was developing the kind of intermediary between the grand cosmic evil stuff and where the rubber meets the road. So in the playtest, it was actually a pharmaceutical beauty company they came up with that was all about youth, preserving youth and what have you. And they took it in interesting ways, very, very ritualistic ways. And so what we ended up doing in play is negotiating with the intermediary that they created and stopping their plans, interrupting their plans through a variety of their counter plans, finding allies, infiltrating a couple times, destroying equipment a couple of times. The other things they tended to do were to uncover secrets. So again, it's an investigation, but very much uncovering the secrets of the town. And then the hours, for as much as I'm very emphasizing them, because to me they're sort of the central pulling theme, it's sort of like Neil Gaiman's Sandman, where the Morpheus is like a central character. But how often does he appear on the page? Not terribly often, especially when it comes to that kind of thing. And so the intermediary of, in this case, the pharmaceutical company would be the actual like rubber meets the road antagonist force. And I think that probably needs to be more emphasized then, because I think that's something I'm losing when I'm talking about it and writing about it. So I'm going to write that down. I'm writing everything you're saying down.
The good news is this is being recorded too.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Oh yeah. There's going to be VODs.
Excellent.
You can rewatch.
Another sort of point of order, not super deep question. You mentioned mechanically most of the actual plays is Forged in the Dark. Are you using position and effect as part of that?
Yes.
Okay. Just curious.
Yeah.
How much, I guess, as a follow-up, how much of the like core system or the sort of gears and stuff from Forged are you bringing into this design, like in terms of skill resolution, or like are you bringing downtime in? Are you using the same harm system?
Yeah, I'm bringing in downtime or bringing the harm system in. It very much was a Forged in the Dark hack at first, and this controversy and my sort of own personal commitments about I'm a staunchly anti-ableist in horror, which is a very hard thing to do. It's a very, very difficult position to be in because so much horror has that baked right in. And so what I'm trying to do is de-emphasize a lot of the more problematic aspects of Forged in the Dark. So like trauma. In the current edition that's up there, it's still using trauma. I recently in the last week went, I think I'm finally arrived at a decision about this. I think it's not going to be trauma. I think it's going to be a binding kind of thing. There's a binding sort of mark that you get, and I think the biggest departure from Forged in the Dark is the logic ghost mechanic, which I did not go into yet.
Truthfully, I don't know what that is.
Yeah,
so
I'm just about. Yeah, I'm gonna spit out about it.
Oh, okay.
So the logic ghost mechanic. So in regular Forged in the Dark, once you get 4 traumas, then you're done. Your character is retired. In this, I'm offering players a choice. They can either retire, or if they so choose, they can continue with this sort of full mark of the hours and basically play a Magnus Archives avatar, where they are a sort of monster in and of themselves. They have greater supernatural powers. They can do more, but now all of a sudden they have a different set of resistance tests to pass because they have to resist becoming a monster themselves. And that is procedurally generated within the book. So like it's they roll some dice, it assigns them to a particular hour, and then it gives them a standard set of monstrous capacities, which the player and the storyteller can then tool to the context. Or they can elaborate and go, oh, what it would be really cool if I could, if the way that my monstrosity sort of manifests is that I only ever appeared in mirrors, something like that, and people have sort of ideas and sort of bounce that off. And that becomes a sort of dangerous thing because it's like you're right on that knife edge of being something that the party has to deal with in an antagonist sense, or being an ally to the party too. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest departure, beyond the retooling of all the playbooks and rewriting all the skills and all that stuff. But the basic bones are the bones of the resolution there are still very Forged.
Cool. I've mostly used up, so I've mostly asked all the questions I wrote down, and I still have some like bullet points that I think are more for kind of like the second half, where I can kind of say the things about my design process, which is I hope not. I don't want to like steamroll you.
Don't worry.
I've gathered a lot of information from what you've said, and I think I have some suggestions and stuff. Pat, did you have more questions that you wanted to answer, or any kind of?
I have got 2 questions that I ask everybody.
Cool.
The first of them is, what do you right now feel like you are nailing with this game?
Oh, I have self-esteem issues.
Well, Tim, what do you feel like you are nailing? What aspect of this game do you feel like you are communicating the way you intended to?
Yeah. Probably one, the overall timbre and aesthetic. I know it's not quite as crunchy as I would like it to be, but I think the overall vibe or feel of it, I think I'm nailing. You know, the sort of glitchy, you know, you've uncovered an order beneath the order kind of stuff. And I think that I've probably done okay at encouraging players to become more invested in creating their own sort of horror fiction through the town generation mechanics. I think that's something that I'm pretty happy with. The rest of it is utterly up to challenge.
Okay, which is great, because the second question in the pair that I ask everybody is, where do you feel like you're falling short of expressing the experience that you're trying to get across?
Yeah, and that's so I aimed for Forged in the Dark because I wanted one of the things that appealed to me about the system was because it offered a very self-contained experience, you know, a very self-contained, like, you know, let's sit down, we can nail this out. We're not going to get bogged down in rules lawyering. We're not going to get bogged down in, you know, got to get the perfect plan. I've had a lot of very bad D&D experiences.
Oh yeah, listen, you show me a game designer who hasn't, baby. I like
right.
What motivates like 3/4 of us.
So I'm like, no, never again. So yeah, I ended up glomming onto Forged in the Dark due to that. Am I still convinced that Forged in the Dark is the way to go? I don't know. That's a very up in the air situation. I've never been terribly strong with designing mechanics ex nihilo. I'm not great with just grabbing them out of the air. So one of the things that I've been trying to figure out is like, okay, so if I were to leave the Forged in the Dark system behind, what would replace it? What would best serve the kind of, you know, not necessarily, I don't want to create a meat grinder as much as it is cosmic horror, but I also don't necessarily want it to become a strictly kind of walk in the park. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I sort of would like players to be able to do with this is think more deeply about the relations we have to time, to land, and to each other, and through a horror context, through a sort of critical horror context. That's a really tall order, and I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to be successful at that.
Okay. No, that's something. So, like, right now, kind of your key, if I'm hearing you right, the key thing between you and expressing what you want to express is that you're not positive you have the right bones for this.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
You are not confident that you could build a skeleton for this.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's incredibly important for us to know going into the second half. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Oh, yeah. Hope it didn't blow anything up.
Listen, if you did, I'm a big tarot nerd. My favorite tarot card is the Tower. I'm a firm believer that some things need to be blown up.
Yeah.
And if you're not confident in your bones, then that's where we need to be. Okay. Yeah. So, audience, you can still ask questions, but right now we're shifting. Instead of asking questions of Adam, we're switching to asking questions of Adam instead of asking questions of Jeffrey. So it is Jeffrey's time, and sometimes my time, and sometimes your time to ask questions of this guy. And we're going to find out what we can do to get Jeffrey feeling 100% confident moving forward, or at the very least, add an additional 20 to 30%.
I take 15.
Thank you for that. So please, what do you have to ask?
Yeah. So this is sort of a version of a question that's been asked of me, so I'm going to ask it back. Is there a process that you found that you've been able to trim these sort of larger ideas into a more self-contained one sheet or one shot style of play? So when you're working with these sort of grand ideas, or when you're really wanting to say something developed, what is your sort of process of winnowing that down for general consumption and also have it still be fun and not just a Brechtian exercise of education?
The interesting thing, an obvious split between what we do as role-playing game designers versus more like strategy game design, is that you're meeting the players halfway. That's generally true, especially with a game like a one-page game. You're meeting them a little less than halfway, but the fun for the players is going to be filling in those gaps using the resources that you've created, and the sort of language that you foster. You mentioned the verbs that you're using. You're giving them a tone, and you're giving them a mechanic, and they're doing the rest. With this project in particular, I think there's a little bit more necessary, a little more onboarding to maybe a one-pager, but you could still do something where you're pulling back on the information that you expect them to have or to retain or to learn, and leaning more into that creative fun that you're fostering with that creating of the town. I think of games like For the Queen, which does a great job of giving you close to nothing and having you as players create something. And even just the mechanic in that game of like, here's a couple different paintings from different artists, pick one, and that's going to sort of inform how you play. That is the tone piece. That is telling you, the Bumblebee Queen is different than the sort of Gothic Moon Queen. And even though it's the same prompts, the same game, the same players, even the way that the visual language conveys a tone and conveys inspiration to the player where they can pick up and run with it is masterful. So the first suggestion I would have is to another game that does this really well is Electric Bastion Land, which does have a setting established. It does have sort of a political structure and a geography that's fluid, but it exists. But when you pick up that book, the first page of it is effectively a bullet point list. It's like 4 sentences that give you what you need to know to get going. I tried to do this with Necronautilus, where I give you 2 to 4 pages in the front about this is who Death is, this is who your characters are, and this is where you find yourself. And then later in the book, there's an expanded kind of lore, but it's still a little bit cut and paste because I want players to fill those gaps and play. Part of the active play is filling those gaps. So with this project, I think you have a challenge, but an interesting opportunity to say, if I had to cut down my lore Bible into a paragraph and hope that players get enough out of that to then make this story their own, what are the most important pillars that you're going to include in that? You have the opportunity later in the book to add on that and to build on that, or to even mechanize it if you wanted to, in the way that the players are collaborating to create their own town. That is absolving you of creating a town, right? You don't have to write the town's history. You don't have to create a map of it, because every play group is going to have their own. Finding those things where players can project onto them, where you're giving them an outline or a stencil and you're allowing them to fill that in, I think is going to double down on the creativity aspect of fun that's very much at play in your game, and also take a lot of the weight off of your shoulders and theirs to make sure that things are by the book. So this was like a ramble thought, but I think taking any idea for setting, for theme, for whatever in like a wider sense of how can I make my game, how can I cut this down into something so digestible? How can I make this meal into a single bite? That answer relies on you boiling it down, finding the 2 or 3 most important ingredients and giving them that amuse-bouche and saying, like, here's what we're going to be playing with. You have the opportunity to capitalize on that later, or you have the opportunity to make that, the foundation and allow them to fill in some of that stuff. So that's sort of always the writer's prerogative on how much they want to give and how much they think is necessary to give. But that's a really important skill to hone to get people to start playing rather than to have to really study before having to play.
As a longtime World of Darkness fan, you're absolutely hitting me directly in my heart with this notion of having to study, Adam. You're absolutely right. Like, some players thrive on it. Like, there are 2 kinds of Lancer fans.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
The people who know the deep lore, the people who don't know there is deep lore.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the second one.
World of Darkness was a huge touchstone as a role player, and I think that may have leaked into this. So good.
No, that it smells a lot like World of Darkness, sweetheart.
I actually just read a very World of Darkness inspired game called Elegy that's on itch. It's by Mauro de Oliveira. I'll drop it in our chat if someone could relay that to the Twitch chat. But
I can't.
It's a vampire game. I think it's hacked from Ironsworn.
Okay.
But part of that is there's a section that says, we all know vampire lore and history and rumors and stuff. Then it gives you like basically a pick list and saying like, we've heard conflict, treat your history like rumors. Vampires don't survive in the sun unless they do, because we've seen Twilight, and we also know, like, I'm pretty sure Nosferatu was just chilling out in sunlight. The way that cultural baggage comes in to play gives you the opportunity to ask players, is this something you want to include in your setting or not? It's going to, again, further those themes of letting players create their own setting and make it bespoke. Because I think you're going to lose a little bit of specialness when I created a town and then the book tells me later on, like, the sort of things that are controlling and pulling these strings are more universal across all the different iterations of play. It's going to take away a little bit of the, this is my town that I made, kind of like pride and joy that comes from that aspect of play. So I think Elegy does a great job of handling that and saying, like, there's lore here to the extent that you want to dive into it, and to the extent that you want to revise it based on how familiar people are with certain aspects of the media that you're referencing. I realized through this conversation that this game reminds me a lot of It. Stephen King's, I've admittedly only seen the newer duo of movies, so never read the book, never saw the original, but that arc of kids having this experience, adults having that experience, and then spoiler alert, the sort of ethereal, otherworldly experience that comes as a result of that mirrors these phases of play, or the eras of play that you were talking about.
That's what it reminds me of. And it's a little bit Shadow of the Demon Lord, isn't it? Just like freely choosing 3 classes one after the other and having them mesh together.
I've never read it.
Oh my goodness. I love Shadow of the Demon Lord. So the leveling system is probably my single favorite advancement system I've ever seen in an RPG. I adore Shadow of the Demon Lord, even though it's very not my vibe, because it's very grim, dark fantasy. But one thing that I love is that there's no gates on any of the prestige classes or late game classes. And you choose 3 classes throughout your character's career of 10 episodes. Actually, now that I mention it, Jeffrey, I think you should maybe read Shadow of the Demon Lord, because it's built for 10 episodes of play. Yeah. And you level at the end of every episode.
Mm-hmm.
But the freedom to just be like, I'm this, and then I'm this, and then I'm this.
Yeah.
And the kind of alchemy between different classes as players freely choose between them is something I thought was really charming about this concept. Is like, no, I was this as a child. Now I'm this as an adult.
Exactly. And that's the dynamic I want to capture.
Yeah, exactly. There's a layer of expression there that I find really wonderful. And yeah, I think the freedom to layer different character classes is wonderful. Although I would condense it a little bit so that players earlier in the experience get the joy of saying, I was this kind of kid, now I'm this kind of the adult, because that's very special. But that's I was suddenly struck by being reminded of Shadow of the Demon Lord. So love that freaking game.
Is there any sort of follow-up that you want? Because I know I rambled quite a bit. Is there anything that you want me to? Okay.
So basically what I'm trying to figure out, I think this is something that I had a lot of conversations with one player in particular, because one of the mechanics that I was originally going to put in was create your own cosmic horror.
I love that, Jeffrey.
And I'll probably end up putting it in there. The problem that I ran into was that let me see if I can condense this, because there's 7 things I'm wanting to say right here, and let's condense it into one. The issue that I had was that every mechanic, I would run it by half of the table and they'd be just fine with it, and then I'd run it by the other half or another group, and suddenly it was like, oh, we're overwhelmed, we don't know how to handle this, we can't read. And it's like, okay, all right. So I have kind of been tossed about in the wind here about what is a reasonable threshold to expect, the sort of complexity, engagement with complexity. And given that, if I should always aim low, then it means sort of the central fiction that came with this, which unfortunately for myself, and not for anyone else, unfortunately for myself, is something with a lot of high investment value, because I've been working on it for 20 years. So it's like, okay, do I have to just kill this darling and bury it in the backyard in order for this to work? And I'm kind of hearing them like, well, that might be.
Yeah, but it can haunt.
Mm-hmm.
It can haunt.
It can haunt. Yeah.
I'm gonna before Adam gives the real grown-up wisdom, I'm gonna give what I've learned playtesting is that the most important things I have learned from playtesting have not been from showing my players a mechanic and asking what they think. The most important things I have learned from playtesting have been from observing how they behave with the rules, and observing the behaviors that come out of that.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you are the designer. At a certain point, you cannot please everybody. Like, there are 2 kinds of Lancer fans, like I said.
Right.
So if you are hung up on writing a game that both halves of your table will appreciate, you're setting yourself up for stress and failure, because first of all, their most meaningful feedback is not what comes out of their mouths, but how they play. And second, if half of them love complexity and half of them hate it, you're not going to please both halves. You gotta pick. You gotta pick. Adam, please.
To piggyback off that, I think one thing, I will admit that I'm not the Forged in the Dark enjoyer in the room. I rarely. There's a lot there that I don't like, and there's a couple things that I do, which does not reflect on what you've done with it or your choice to use it. Just as a point of order, one thing that I think is interesting, is you. To me, Forged has this modularity that I find interesting, where you can have a game that's only downtime. You could have a game that just takes this sort of retcon-y, like mission building as you go system and forego the dice, the skill checks, whatever. And because of that, I wouldn't say that you're innately on a wrong path, because I think specifically, I wrote down, I don't remember what it's called in Fortune in the Dark, but your ability to be like, oh, I think it's just flashbacks. That seems like a very pivotal aspect of play for you. And I would definitely keep that, even if you end up replacing any of the other Forge stuff, because that seems both to really hammer home the themes at work and to make play easier. That said, that might be one of very few systems that are necessary to tell the kinds of stories that you want, because Forged in the Dark, as a blessing and curse, gives you the entire menu. And I don't know, I don't think most designers expect you to order a 5-course meal. You're going to pick and choose the courses that you want to curate your game experience. And I personally like to leave some of those out, because I am curating a style of play that more matches my own. Whether that's a priority to you, or you want to sort of make a more utilitarian choice and have the options there and allow players to engage or not engage as they will. I personally find including ones like that, it's going to make it harder for you as the designer to make sure all of those are as watertight as they need to be. But again, not to dissuade you from doing so, just knowing that that is a tall order if the main function of your game is not is to tell these stories. You might not need a harm track. You might not need an attack action. If you want to completely blow it out of the water, you might not need dice. You might not need challenges, or the sort of random challenge aspect. That was why I asked about position and effect earlier, because I personally find in playing any Forged game, that's a massive speed bump towards me having the story in front of me and continuing the story. It hits pause on the movie that we're all watching so we can talk about what happens next. And I recognize that that's a thing that's novel and a thing that works for a lot of players, but just specifically for me, does not work. That kind of ruins the fun for me.
This is really good to hear. This is so necessary to hear. And well, because a lot of so I wish I could tell past Jeffrey all of this and say, no, because as you're talking, I'm remembering the process. I'm like, okay, what led me to this decision? What led me to that decision? What led me? And I'm remembering now that I was overly concerned with swaying D&D people who are used to a very certain, who is a very certain style of play. And if it's too alien, diceless role play, what?
That's probably the biggest crime among indie game designers that D&D perpetrates, is the idea that your game has to do everything. Yeah. When in fact your game shouldn't do everything. Yeah. It should do one thing really good.
Right, exactly.
That's my philosophy as a whole. Like, that's especially how I'm able to make like zine games and micro games. And most recently, my project 1978 that was just on Kickstarter. It's a 1 versus 1 slasher horror where you have a slasher and a survivor. They go into the house, they try to fight each other, and then they come out. That system is built specifically for a one-on-one competitive thing that starts during the day and peaks during the night. It's entirely built around the structure of those movies and how they work, why they work, what makes them fun for us to watch, and what we would do in those positions. You're not going to make a date. I mean, I will leave the door open if someone wants to, but it's not built for a dating simulator. It's not built for a combat simulator. It's one type of story, which you can tell infinite stories within, but it is really polished and really good at doing one thing. And that, to me, is my strength as a designer, is figuring out what that one thing I want is, and then building from that foundation mechanically, thematically, artistically, till I have this final thing that is a really greased up machine that will take you to one destination.
Good.
Your game has that within it, has that possibility already. It's going to allow you to tell those types of stories, those kid to adult sort of like trauma bonds and all the things that come with that. It's going to bring in that surreal horror, and just don't worry about scratching every itch, because again, like Kat said, with your half mechanics and half not crew, you can't please everybody. The best thing you can do is make a game that pleases you, and in doing so, the people who are like you and the people that care about things the way that you do are going to find that, and they're going to like live in there. Like that's going to be their game.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think kind of to piggyback a little bit on what Adam was saying, is that like pace is so invisible, but like no matter what skin you put on it, no matter what you call anything, Forged in the Dark is paced for heists. It is paced like a heist flick. It puts the weight in the same places that a heist flick puts the weight. That's what it feels like. D&D is paced like a D&D. It's D&D. It's its own. It's not a fantasy novel. And people run into trouble with D&D when they're expecting it to put the weight in the places a fantasy novel places weight, and it's not. So like,
those are not shortcomings of those games either.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Their strength in their strong places. Yeah.
Absolutely. But it sounds to me like you're not putting your weight in the places a heist flick puts its weight.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not pacing your stories the way a heist flick does. Forged might not be your SRD, my guy.
Yeah.
Even though it's not written in the rules, even if you rename literally everything, you can feel where the game puts its weight, where the game takes its time to have random outcomes, where the game speeds up and let players determine what happens freely. That's in the bones.
Right. Good.
Right. So with that, I had also just written the note earlier of don't get in the player's way of them having the kind of fun that they want to have, because it sounds like the haunted town part is excelling, right? Like that's something that's working and that's good. I think my suggestion would be to see if that can be extrapolated further. You build your town, and you mentioned some people will sort of like start to build the enemy forces in the same way. Maybe that's something that you can direct. Here's how you would build a cosmic entity with the same system, or here's how you build the sort of shadow organization that's in between them with the system. Because again, to circle back to something I said a long time ago, that feeling of this is ours is really powerful. That's going to be something that players take with them, that when they talk about their experience playing your game, they're going to talk about the town that they made together, more than they're ever going to talk about an instance of combat or besting an opponent. Like that sort of creative thing that you get to make something, and that something sticks with you, and it affects everything that comes after it, how you play, where you go, what your characters are doing. that's going to be a pretty powerful feeling for players. And I would say if that's something that you can emphasize, then that would be valuable. Obviously, if it's not, then that's not. But and tangentially with that, a thing I like to do is just make 1 or 2 pre-made ones for the people who want to skip that and get into, because again, you're making an experience to do certain things for certain groups of people. If I want to play this game in 2 hours, even though I would really like to do the haunted town part, we might just need to go into a town that exists and play. So having that will stave off some of your, it allow you to sort of, again, emphasize your themes, to give them the language that you want them to use to color the painting the way that you want to, while also giving them the option to engage further, but not in that same way I was just describing, where the option is extraneous. Like, this is a good thing, I think, to offer an escape for, but also to make it like a pivotal part of your play, if that is a fun, like an emphasis of fun in play.
Good.
In testing, like Kat said, you're watching how people react, how they play.
Yeah.
When you get those like moments where someone's like, "Oh yeah, dude, do that," that's when you like take the note. This is the thing that I want to put in the game for sure, because I want that reaction. I want that emotional response to something. And I think, based on what you're saying, that creative aspect is really going to be what players feel rewarded by in a non-mechanical sense. That is, like, the game rewards you by making you get to say something really cool. And like, that's sort of an invisible part of mechanical design is, yes, when you roll dice and you get X, you get Y reward. But when you're with your friends and something cool happens, the reward is not in the rule book. Like, that reward is just social, and it is just like cool.
Yeah, exactly. I think a really good example of that during playtest actually was one of the players managed to skirt by. I mean, the mechanics were sort of almost secondary. They were secondary. And the player just kind of used it to soar, to create this beautiful, tense moment where they're facing down, these horrible things that I'm not going to describe. And, and slowly walking towards playing the world's most staked game of hopscotch. Like, it was very simple. It was just hopscotch. But if they lost, it was the horrible things were going to happen, which again, I'm not going to describe.
Oh, yeah.
But it was a very theatrical moment that thankfully the player picked up, and I'm like, yes, please, yes, pick it up. Wonderful. And I'm just like sitting here cheering, going, yes, this is wonderful, because that to me is like the really, really electric part of when the playtest was working, was when folks would pick up the ball and they would work with, I would give them the prompt of, here's a Gribbly, here's what's motivating the Gribbly, and now what are you going to do with the ball? And have them think story forward rather than mechanic forward, and thinking in terms of how they can present themselves in a narrative of horror, such that it's still heroic but still dark and still scary, that kind of thing. Yeah. I think that's a really long way of saying I agree.
And here's the thing: when you've got your bones good, your players don't have to choose between being story forward and mechanic forward.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the bones will point them to both.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, taking your bones out and replacing them is a painful surgery.
Oh, so yeah.
That's its own thing. I also think, I don't know how much you engaged with it, but obviously the idea of clocks in Forged in the Dark would be a really easy mechanical way to reflect some of your time themes. And that's such a perfect marriage already. So yeah, I think flashbacks and clocks, I don't want to put words in your mouth or anything, but I think you need those, because those are really bringing home the things that you're describing.
Yeah.
The action and harm resolution, I don't know if it's as useful as something else might be. So, and I think too, something that a lot of people don't do, when I read Forged in the Dark games, it's very often a full body skin, where they do include every part of the SRD, and I think that's a detriment. Like I mentioned, I think you want to streamline. I think you want to make sure every piece of it has a reason that you brought it in. So the flashbacks obviously have a major reason, but there are things that could end up on the cutting room floor, and your game won't suffer because of it.
Yeah.
Just as a quick note that I wrote, 2 games that I don't know if you're familiar with, but would be very helpful and inspiring in terms of some of the mechanical stuff that I'm talking about for research. The first would be the Gila Hack by Spencer Campbell. Also, it's now being implemented into a game that came out, I think, today or tomorrow, called Hunt by Spencer.
No.
But it is a diceless fantasy role-playing like skeleton. The Gila Hack is a proof of concept that hasn't been edited or proofed or anything, but it makes a lot of sense. And I think it would really work for some of the narrative themes that you want, especially as your character ages, where you can just do the thing that you want to do by spending points, and you bring those points back by doing something else, which is usually in fantasy, it's like camping out.
Right.
Because Spencer's philosophy is, if I'm a skilled warrior, I shouldn't miss with my sword 75% of the time. Instead, I just always hit with my sword. And, just as a thin air example, it's like maybe to get more energy, I either need to eat something, I need to like say a prayer to my deity if I'm a cleric or something. Like there's narrative things that are going to emphasize your themes. It's going to emphasize what a player is doing, and it's going to extract some of that random like randomness is fun. I love dice and games, and I'm not opposed to it. But I think if you're telling a pointed story in the way that you are, especially in earlier phases, and maybe this expands as you play different phases, that might be something nice to learn from.
Nice.
The other thing I wrote down for investigation specifically, learning about these creatures, learning about the organizations that are between you and them, like the stages of them. I really love the carved in Brindlewood movement in games, specifically starting with Brindlewood Bay by Jason Cordova. The idea, the conceit of this mechanic is that there's not one answer to a mystery.
Sorry, I got so excited.
the author, the game designer, doesn't say, Adam Vass is the killer. He's the one under the mask. Like
It tracks.
There's more than two killer masks in this room right now. But so it doesn't say that in the book, and that's not the expected result, because when you have something that a player must learn or must figure out, you're in that sort of, like when you're in a video game and you can't leave the room because you can't find the damn key and you swear you looked everywhere. That feeling is not good as a player.
Yeah, exactly.
So Brindlewood does it. It's this really cool way. It's a PBTA derivative. So like when you want to solve the crime in this book, you roll 2d6 and you add the number of clues that you found. Clues are a mechanical thing that are a result of earlier moves, which again, like if you combined these systems, I think there's something really beautiful about just choosing to find a clue at a cost that it reflects the narrative. Yes. So the group pools your clues, you roll, and if depending on, roll plus clues, if you get a 10 plus, the theory that you theorized is true. It becomes true. So even though you have these pre-made adventures and different groups are going to come up with different results that are informed by the setting and informed by the playbooks, which is again going to feed into your system where the kids' playbooks, the adult playbooks, they're going to work very differently, but you can still use those in ways that are going to make bespoke but creative solutions. And that too, it's there's a sort of similar thing in my game Cobwebs where it's a conspiracy and everyone is adding to the conspiracy. So by the time it's over, you end up with something that everyone contributed to, but no one designed. And that feeling, every time I've played it, every time I've heard other people play it, that's the like light bulb where it's like, I never saw it. I get to be surprised as a player, even in a GM-less game where we all are contributing. I get that feeling of surprise and I get that feeling of accomplishment because we solved it. And like that duality, that's like some Cloud9 feeling. That's a really cool thing as a player. So I think there's something, even if, again, you're taking piecemeal parts from all these different SRDs and these different mechanics, and you just take the clues thing from Brindlewood, that's going to allow that creative fun that you're experiencing, that you're witnessing your players have, and it's going to give it juice. Like, it's going to emphasize that you as players are kind of in control of this world, but you as characters are still going to sort of, I was going to say, suffer the consequences. It doesn't have to be that dark.
Yeah.
Right. They still have to navigate the difficulty.
Because
Exactly.
the thing about things like this is that they have something that you're going to really, I think, thrive on, is that I think Adam will agree, they have the propensity to spiral wildly out of control.
Yeah. Yes.
And wildly out of control sounds like that's exactly what you're gunning for.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like the horrors in this game are called infection theses. Like it's just like it's wildly like, what the hell are you saying? So like the more I enabled the players to go into that wildly creative space, to kind of go, okay, I don't just want, a vampire werewolf, or I don't just want, deadly ghost child who climbs out of the TV. Rather, I'm going to do something a little bit different here and have them really start to be creative with that kind of thing. And I think I am going to digest these SRDs with the force of an angry god.
Absolutely.
A cool thing with that too is because of the ethereal nature of it, we sort of skirted. I would have loved, a whole nother show where we just talk about horror and how to accomplish horror in role playing. But because these creatures are not well-defined things, right? You don't say like you said, it's not a werewolf. We all have a image of a werewolf, but I don't even remember the word that you used. But these infection, like awful
infection thesis,
these infection theses, right? I don't have any kind of visual for that. So even just saying to a player, like, what, when an infection thesis is nearby, what do you feel on the back of your neck? Is it their breath? Is it the cooling down of the room around you? Like, how do you give, it allows you to, again, not have to be prescriptivist. It's just going to save you some design and some brain energy, but it's also going to allow players to bring in what scares them and what makes them uncomfortable and assign it to this creature. And that is what cosmic horror does really well. It's projecting our own fears onto this thing, rather than giving you a drawing of the thing and saying, look at it, it's scary, isn't it?
Right, exactly.
So having that blown out to take some of the theory behind a clue that solves a mystery that doesn't have a shape. In the same way, we have these monsters that don't have shapes that are threatening all of our ability to find these clues. And this vagueness and this, I don't necessarily want to say lack of detail, because I think there is a lot of detail here, but the ambiguity of it is what is going to be creepy about all of that. And I think that's too with the It parallel. It's way scarier in text than it is when you see a clown on your TV screen, because then you have a very literal representation of what is otherwise supposed to be an abstract horror.
I am so glad that you keyed in on the horror of ambiguity, because I'm sitting here going, oh God, it's something that I'm very passionate about. Like, I despise, I'll just be, this is just a me thing. This is a no one else thing. If you like this is great. I've never liked clear antagonists. I'm very like,
Yeah.
If you saw the movies I liked, you'd be like, this is the least surprising thing. Like, look at this. That's David Lynch over there. All right, of course you like David Lynch. So like the ambiguity there, you know, the sort of, I don't know what's happening, and I just know it's wrong. Like
So
that feeling, that's what I want to capture.
As a weird tangent too, I think that ambiguity exists in a lot of classic horror in a way that you might not think so. Like, I obviously just made a game based on Halloween, so that's very fresh on my mind.
Yeah.
Michael Myers has been retconned to infinity, and it's hard to tell what the truth is. The least scary version of him is a kid that grew up and he's all weird. Correct. The scariest version of him is he's literally the boogeyman, and the more you're scared of him, the more powerful he is.
Yeah.
And obviously, he always kind of exists somewhere between those two things on the spectrum, but that's what makes him a scarier entity than someone like Freddy Krueger, who conceptually is very scary, but because he is shown so much and because he has so much character to him and charisma, arguably, it makes him a little campy by his very nature, instead of as scary as the guy that invades your dreams should be. As a side note, Ever Dream This Man is a game I'm making about dream invaders that's coming out in October, which is going to be really cool, where you draw your own scary face, and that's like it's like more creepypasta inspired, but anyway, that's
is that going to be a big release or a zine release for the patrons?
So it's a zine, but it's part of what I'm calling the Trick or Treat suite. I have 5 zines coming out in October that are all different, like examinations of horror, different subgenres of horror, in different methods of play. But since that one was there, I just felt like I had to plug it. One other thought to kind of extrapolate on the ambiguity of a creature, the threat to you. Lovecraft-esque from Black Armada games was a big inspiration for Cobwebs, because the theory mechanic of trying to guess what this thing is that's haunting us and having it evolve through play is that in their version of it, it's to make your own cosmic horror that's not tied to this, Lovecraft mythology, right? You're making your own ancient gods, you're making your own deep ones or whatever. And again, you get this duality of having something that you create that feels really cool, and also playing in the narrative world where that thing is trying to kill you, and that makes it scary. So there's a lot of cool game DNA that I think you'll really enjoy playing with, even if they don't end up being in this game of ours. Like, if you just play this game and you get that, because I know you're a horror head and I know you're a writer, you're going to get that satisfaction of like, we made this terrifying thing. And like a lot of modern horror too, you're going to be able to inject it with social commentary. You're going to inject it with emotional themes and messaging, just through play. And I think that's going to really, if you did integrate it into your game, really bring home a lot of the themes that you're trying to get players to experience. And I also think that's going to, the other thing I wrote down as, besides the creative aspect of fun, it sounds like a lot of your post-game reports have a sort of contemplative tone to them of like, both in your desire for what people walk away with and kind of how they would talk about. I think that's an interesting thing to think of, is how would a player recap the story that you just told? Or how are they going to think about this game tomorrow after they wake up? The things that stick with them. Yes, they're going to be the bullet point action things, but they're also going to be like, what did I learn? What did I feel from this? And I think having players assign those feelings, those their own issues and traumas, and again, you're going to want to have safety tools to make sure that this is all above water.
Yes.
But as much as someone wants to engage with the things that they are scared of and the things that bring them anxiety, and build that into a monster that you're playing with at the game, is that cool, like really fascinating level of bleed that can come from playing horror games. And the reason that we want to be scared as humans, like being scared as entertainment, is because we're learning these things about ourselves and we're getting to explore them in arguably safer ways than just like experiencing a literal monster.
Right, exactly. No, this
Okay.
is brilliant. I'm ready to rip out the bones now. And get to work.
I'm so glad because we're approaching our destination, everybody. This is my next question, my final question is, Jeffrey, how are you feeling now? How are you? Where's your confidence at?
I'm pretty invigorated. I mean, I got to the 15%. So that was the threshold. Yeah, no, like I think a lot of it just kind of came down to hearing, someone I admire who makes games I think are brilliant just say, look, you have the permission to make the fucking game. Instead of trying to please
that's
everybody.
That's a great, I hope that's like a thing I can put out into the ether forever, is like, stop worrying about what is, especially no shade to you at all, but we exist in a world that is not even derivative of D&D anymore. We are just our own parallel, much smaller thing. So that's sort of a fallacy that we can appeal to that audience, because they aren't looking for what we are offering them, and that's totally fine. With that liberation and with that Band-Aid rip, you then get to create your art for yourself, and your audience will find it. And that's what is fun and rewarding about doing what we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there no offense taken, absolutely. Yeah. This is something that, like, I need someone to kick me in the ass, obviously, and just be like, go do the fucking thing. So, like, do the thing.
Do the homework first. We've assigned you so much homework, but then do the thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone, we have safely arrived at our destination. Remember that you can find our episodes on YouTube if you've missed any. Thank you for flying with us today. And remember, your dreams don't have to stay grounded. You're clear for takeoff. Oh, also follow these two, please. Follow them. Follow Jeffrey's at Stranger Peas and Adam is at World Champ Game Co.
Yep.
Find them, love them.